Hello, everyone, and welcome to tonight's pre-town meeting finance and budget review, where we'll be reviewing fiscal year 2024 proposed budgets that'll be reviewed and discussed at town meeting next week. My name's Jim Sullivan, the chairperson of the Finance Committee. With us tonight is Doug Lyons, Dr. Doug Lyons from the Superintendent of Schools. We have Dan Sherman, who is also a member of the Finance Committee, and he's also the chairperson of the Forecasting and Policy Subcommittee. We have Steve Mayo, Town Administrator, and also Joe Conway, the Director of DPW. So we've got a series of slides to go over to review and give you a little bit of the financial picture going forward as proposed for 2024. We'll turn it over to Dan.
Thank you, Jim. So, like we have done in the past 16, this will be our 16th presentation to town on our financial picture. I'm going to cover the past in terms of receipts, what accounts we have, reserves, spending, a little bit about the present situation, and then finally about the future. So on receipts, you can see our receipts, local receipts have been doing pretty well. We're up somewhere around $8 million in change. We also get a fair amount of state aid, and I'll talk a little bit more about state aid. And then a tax levy. And our tax levy obviously is the most important piece. A Prop 2.5 plus new growth adds to our tax levy substantially. We're over $80 million at this point, and for 2022, roughly 83 million is our estimate for 23 and then going into 24. So that is our most important piece. You'll notice that our average annual increase is at 4%. And the last 5-year average on our receipts is roughly at 3.57%. And I would urge everybody to sort of remember those numbers because they become much more important in terms of the current and into the future.
I think what's interesting, if we could stay on that slide for a minute, what's interesting to me, when we do our budget setting process, we start, I don't know, we'll close out this fiscal year on June 30th. We'll really start thinking about the budget for next year on July 1, I guess. Or maybe we take a week off. But all we really know going into the budget process is the yellow area there, which is great.
Which we're not quite
there yet.
because we know the yellow area for the past.
Right.
But going forward, Victor, our assessor,
We'll know.
keeps the numbers close to his vest.
We'll know in September, end of August, September, what new growth is. So when we're setting the next fiscal year budget, we will know what our tax levy number is going to be. But local receipts, state aid, those are all things we're basing on experience and kind of reading the tea leaves. So it does make for an interesting dynamic when we're setting the budget together.
It does. So more on receipts, and this is something we've talked about at length in terms of our ability to withstand downturns. Because the tax levy really isn't subject to the state, downturns, financial downturns of Wall Street or anything like that, the higher the percentage of our receipts that is tax levy, the more stable is our revenue. And you'll notice that state aid, for example, going back to 2002, 2003, in that neighborhood, it was about 20% of our budget, whereas today it's down to about 10%. Now, I would argue it should be back to 20%, but the fact that it had decreased in the 2000s made things a little difficult for us, especially 2008, 2009, 2010, when they were dropping the amount of state aid. That hurt us quite a bit.
So our percentage of our budget that is funded by state aid really isn't half, from 20% to 10%.
Yeah.
That's been a big issue that we've had to undertake on our own. And like Dan said, it is great because, if they sneeze on the State House steps, we don't get pneumonia. But I'd like to get a little bit more of that myself anyway.
Yeah.
Maybe get a little cold or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to see a little bit of an increase to that state aid line when you look at it over time. Exactly.
Yeah, and I did some work with some other communities like Springfield, New Bedford, other areas that they have roughly anywhere from 40 to 50% of their budget is based on state aid. So when state aid, has a hiccup, they really suffer.
Right.
On local receipts, we had a banner year 2019, and then COVID hit. So we're slowly creeping back up. You'll see in fiscal year '22 that we're just a little bit shy of 8 million. We do expect '23 to be about a little over 8 million and change. And the big nut is the bottom line again, motor vehicle excise taxes. That is like 50% of our local receipts, is over $4 million for '22. And everything else is just, some gravy, but it really is the other excise taxes and motor vehicle excise tax. But the trend we think is going to start going back up again. And we'll see that when we look at some numbers for '24. Again, back on state aid, we finally creeped above how much we received back in 2001, which was about 11 million. So now we're up almost 12 through '22, and we expect to be over 12 for '24. We have a stabilization fund. That was up over $5 million, roughly 8% of our budget back in 2000. Then we went a little bit of a spending spree. And it's been all the way down to less than $1 million back in 2006, creeping back up. We're almost $2 million now in our stabilization. It's a rainy day fund, and it's about roughly 3% of our total budget. And again, for the audience out there, remember that 3% figure because it becomes important a little later on. Our free cash, this is basically our checking account. This is where we have monies that we can spend at fall and spring town meeting. We use free cash for closing budget gaps. You can see that up until 2011, it was extremely low. It was, only in the $2 million range, and it's only about 2% of our budget. Now it's creeped up to the point where we got as high as almost 10%, 2016. Been a little bit of a sawtooth after that, but at the end of '22, we were sitting at about $6.5 million, representing about 6.5% of our total budget. And combine that with the stabilization, we're at 9.5%, which we have a policy of roughly 10% of maintaining free cash plus stabilization. So we have some funds for a rainy day. We also have a debt service fund. And this fund is one that we use for major projects. We've done road bonds, we've done the Dole Bear, we've done recreation bonds, we don't have the Galvin running through that because that got separated out by the state.
The public safety building?
Yeah, public safety buildings run through the debt service fund. So we put money into this fund, we take money out of this fund. It really acts as a cushion on the budget because we can tap this fund to even things out and smooth out year-to-year fluctuations. And right now, we're just a little shy of $800,000 in the debt service fund. Looking at capital for a minute, I've got, this is a little complicated, but what I've tried to do here is take the capital by itself, which is the purple line, and it's running at about $2 million. Tonight's we'll present fiscal year '24 numbers. It's over $2.3 million. But as a percentage of our total budget, it represents about 2%. But if you combine that spend with the bond payments that we have to put in, those are the two upper lines. We're spending a little over $4 million on capital, and as a percentage of the budget, it's running about 4.25%, 4.5% of our budget. And we'd like to keep that capital up in that 4 or 5% range because we need to maintain our buildings, and we don't want to give Joe here a heart attack when we cut all the capital monies and he has to maintain these buildings or put patches on roofs.
It's greatly appreciated.
The other thing we can look at is some large budgets. These three are not department budgets. Healthcare is a big nut. You'll see a real dip there in 2013, 2012 when we went to the GIC. Saved us a lot of money, more than the $2 million that's shown here, because we also started putting money into our post-retirement medical trust to the tune of about $1.8 million. So that's been creeping back up now just because of inflation on healthcare. But it's a great success story. We're over 30% funded. And I think that's probably the tops in the state for any community to have that much money set aside for retiree medical. Most cities and towns are in the 5, 6, 8, 10% range if they're funding anything at all. Some are not. Some still have a zero. That's a great story because it helps us with our bond rating. Moody's, S&P, and the rest of them look at what we're doing with the healthcare and post-retirement medical, and it helped us get our AAA rating. I'm convinced of that.
Absolutely. And there's about 30 million in that account right now.
Yeah.
That's quite a story.
Yeah, it's a great story.
It's very fiscally responsible, and it's just, if we don't do something continuously or on a straight effort, the implications are huge. So it's a great story from quite a while ago that's been maintained.
When I talk with the fellow managers around this area, we all are funding our retirement because we
You have
have
to.
to. There's a statute
Right.
involved.
Correct.
Not everybody is funding retirement and other post-employment benefits, or OPEB as we call it. I think when we first went in, I think we had little buttons, got OPEB, we wore
I
them.
still have my
You still
button.
have our buttons, so it was a big move, and going to the GIC, which was with the cooperation of the unions, actually, to do it, it really made a difference in their lives and our lives, and I pitched it as a job security bill at the time, because that's what it was.
Right.
So that's worked really well, and we have a great relationship with the union committees and work together to make this continue the story on. So great support of the town council and the FinCom on this too.
Yeah, the retirement budget is, as you can see, has been going up much quicker in the last few years, over 6%. And on retirement, some of that is related to additional benefits. Some of it has to do with change in actuarial assumptions, which increased the contribution. In '22, we had a very poor year, like everybody did on the markets. Up until that point, it was extraordinary. But part of that increase is the change of assumptions, and people are living longer up until COVID. And we're going to see what COVID has done to the mortality tables right now. It's something as an actuary, I'm looking at it on a regular basis, trying to understand what impact 1.1 million Americans who've died of COVID. And it's more than that because of lack of testing early on. The actual number is much greater than that, especially if you bring in ancillary causes like increase in diabetes, suicide is up, a number of other factors. So on the good news side, retirement will be fully funded right now in 2036. And when that is fully funded, then we can divert some of that savings to the retirement, to OPEB and post-retirement medical, and help fund that. So we got a long ways to go on retirement. And then the last item there is the regional schools, Northeast Regional, as well as Minuteman and Essex Tech is in that number. That line is going to go up quite a bit because of the new school. And in the forecast, I've included our best guess as to what additional costs will hit us in 26 and 27, maybe some in 25, I think, for the Northeast folks. So I'm afraid that line is going to get a little steeper.
And that will all be within the tax levy.
Yep.
It'll not be a debt exclusion, so it won't be an extra tax bill.
So this chart or table shows personal services budgets by major departments. And personal services is basically salaries for all the individuals who are working in the system. Schools, you can see the increase from 30.8 million up to 39.5 over the 5-year period, so the average increase turns out to be 5.1. Fire is at 5.225, library, police 4.944 for DPW. General government 2.8, looks good.
Yeah.
Human services though 8.5. And this is directly related to COVID. We added a lot of staff and costs and so forth to deal with that.
I would say COVID and our investment in mental health and
Right.
social work for all. So that's a small number. So you add a few bodies there, and that really does the percentage-wise increases. But I think it's been well worth it, and probably helped all those other numbers be a little bit lower than they would be if some of those services fell into police, schools, and maybe library as well.
Yeah. The point I'm going to make out of this, though, is that the 4.9% average over that 5-year period is something that, I'd be quite frank, it concerns me because it's something that we cannot maintain going forward. Looking at the budgets in total, so that adds in other costs like contracts and maintenance vehicles and everything else that goes into a department budget. The schools have come in at 4.6, fire is at 5%, library is 3, police at 6, DPW at 6, general government 3.7, human services 5.3, and a total of, again, 4.9, which is consistent with the prior slide, a total of 4.9% over the 5-year period. So a little bit about budget priorities. So looking forward, or today, one of the things we really focus on is, where's our needs? Where do we need to spend the money? And this is always, in terms of a policy decision, we don't have unlimited funds, so, where do we put our money? And this is in alphabetic order, not by priority. If I wanted by priority, I have like 1 through 7 or something like that. But no, this is purely alphabetic. Buildings, of course, we got to maintain our buildings, otherwise it costs us a whole lot more down the road. Education obviously is critical. We need to educate our kids. Someone's got to take care of me. I want somebody who's well educated when I get old. Energy efficiency is a big nut. We're doing a lot in that area, and we're going to continue to do that. Fields and playgrounds, we've got the recreation bond. We spent a bunch of money on that, and when Joel goes through the capital, you'll see quite a bit of money spent there. Public health and wellness is something that Steve had just mentioned, and obviously critical with the pandemic and all. Public infrastructure, roads, sidewalks. I want to talk about the sidewalks.
Well, there's been a great movement to increase walkability and non-motorized mobility, I guess the way to look at it, and accessibility all around town. And I think in the next few years, or starting now, it started a lot more in safe routes to schools, a lot more trying to get a lot more people to walk to schools, walking paths, more around the lake, sidewalks. You're not going to see a lot of places. You see sidewalks going to nowhere. The director talked about this at the town council meeting the other night. You're not going to see that anymore. You're going to see it link up. One thing we did find during the pandemic is that people love to walk. They love to walk in their neighborhoods as well. So trying to bring that all together. When you see a road being done today, you're seeing sidewalks being done, curbing being done, all utilities being completed underneath, and then the road going. So it's really kind of a holistic approach. But sidewalks, you're going to see a lot of them. And in fact, the town council out of ARPA earmarked $1.1 million of ARPA money for sidewalks on top of the road bonds and the other things they're doing. So you're going to see a lot of sidewalks over the next few years being done and completed.
That's a lot more than the sidewalk history of $50,000.
It was $50,000 a year for decades.
For decades, with $50,000 for sidewalk.
$50,000, and then there was a period of time in the early 2000s, especially around when money started getting tight around 2008. We didn't fund any new sidewalk construction outside of Chapter 90 for a decade.
Oh, yeah.
So we're really making up for some sins of the past and trying to connect all the dots and make sure that there's a rhythm and a flow to everything out there on the road.
I live on a quiet street, High Street, so you don't need a sidewalk up there.
Will anybody want to walk up that?
Oh, yeah, people who want a lot of exercise.
Duly noted.
And their dogs.
And public safety, of course.
And public safety, of course, that is always a top priority. So in terms of fiscal year 24, where we're at. So right now, we're going to finish the year 23 at about 9% of our budget for our reserves. That's, again, stabilization and free cash. So we're pretty close at that point. We have enhanced a number of services because of COVID-19, and those are continuing in this year's budget. We also have some capital projects that Joe will talk about here in a minute. But if you look at what's in front of us in the next 5 years, he's identified roughly $78 million worth of capital projects that need to be addressed, and we're going to put in just over 2. So a bit of a Band-Aid, but we'll just keep plugging away at it.
Much better than it was in 2008, 2009.
Yes, yeah. We had a budget of what, 300,000?
300,000, I think.
Yeah, it was sad, very sad. On the good news side, meals and hotel taxes are back. We're going to be back around $1 million. We expect a further rebound. Mr. Gill has informed us the other night that his estimate is higher than mine for fiscal year '23 by $200,000-300,000.
We turned Mr. Gill into quite an optimist. I don't know what happened. But
It was pleasant to see how it came together.
Yeah, it was. It was very, very pleasant. And so, so a piece of good news there. And our snow and ice overdraft for fiscal '23 will continue to be zero. It's been zero for a few years now.
okay. Now, let's not jinx it. There is still a little bit of time left.
It was
If it
70
falls,
Yeah.
it could melt.
Yeah, if it falls, it can melt. I agree. I'm with that
I had
one.
80 degrees. What is he talking about?
Pavement temperature is very warm right now, so we stand a good chance of beating whatever comes.
Yeah. Also for fiscal year '24, we're looking at the budgets. We have some outstanding debt we have to think about. We have $82 million that we're paying off for the public safety building, Greenwood roof, recreation, Galvin, Walton, roads and drainage, and other miscellaneous items. So we do have a lot of, think of that as being our $82 million mortgage on our infrastructure. Our retirement unfunded liability is roughly at $53 million as of January 1 of '22. It's probably another $10 million higher than that today because of the market. But we're paying that off through 2036, and then we'll be fully funded and just paying off current costs. We just recently received an OPEB report, our post-retirement medical. That unfunded liability is at $48.5 million as of July 1, '22. So we have a grand total mortgage, if you will, of $183 million to work through. And obviously, those payments are taking a big chunk out of our budget, over $6 million to retirement, $1.4 million for OPEB, and I don't know, was it about $3 million for the $3.5 million, I think, for the debt on the bonds,
Yep.
something like that. So we're making payments, but we have to keep these numbers in mind.
I think one thing before you
Yeah.
flip off that one is that we are really vigilant about looking into every sort of state aid, federal aid we can get for a lot of these capital projects. And maybe Dr. Lyons wants to talk about the Greenwood roof. That you and I had a discussion about that before we went in. Been on the capital list for a while, and what did we do? We put in for
We wrote a statement of interest in the same window that we put a statement of interest in for the high school, and we thought nothing ventured, nothing gained, and this has kind of become our mantra, like, let's go after the state money, see what we can get. We'll rather try and not have success than not try. In this particular case, the Greenwood roof was funded through the MSBA, and they just made their final payments
Right.
back to us this week.
this week. Yeah, so we ended up going in under the emergency repair program, and ended up, the state picked up half of the cost.
Half.
We have, so roughly 50%, I think. We didn't really think that was going to happen when we put
Right.
it in.
Right.
Right.
But because we're in the throes of the high school, but hey, that's a big difference to us.
And
So
the,
it's a
and the
great-
program, sorry to interrupt you, but the program that we access those funds through has now been put on hold. So monies can be diverted to new
new
high school,
schools, yeah.
or new school construction.
Right.
And so towns won't even have the opportunity to get those funds. So, the timing was really perfect. And
yeah.
we recouped 50% of
Yeah.
the cost of that project.
What was the cost of the project?
I want to say 1.2.
I would say so. We did some other items there too that we rolled in that we had
Right,
to. But
well-
so we got $600,000 from the state, which was really
Yeah.
good. And that was on the capital list for a while.
Oh, for years.
For
And
years.
I don't think that, that was one that was an albatross in,
Yeah.
the $6 or $7 million of requests every year, so, really treaded in warrant article territory, so I feel like the committee not having to debate that and feel the pressure of not being able to, consciously get that into their plan because of all the other things it would offset. I mean, that MSBA win was
Yeah.
tremendous.
We were also able to do some ADA work in that building.
Rolled that in, yeah.
And some abatement work in that building, which, is only going to pay a dividend down the road.
So that was a real success story for us there. Right.
Great. So on the revenue side for fiscal year '24, this is what we're expecting. Tax levy increase of 3.8 million, roughly 4.6%. So think of that as being 2.5% increase because of Prop 2.5, and then the remaining 2.1% is for new growth, is what we're expecting. Will get us up to $88 million. So as I said, 1.7 million of that is new growth. We're hopeful that the 1.7 is greater than that, but until we hear from our assessor, we're running with 1.7, or until we hear from the power line.
Right, or both.
Yeah, or both, Eversource, right. We did receive an increase in state aid, roughly 965,000. And I say roughly because there are 3 different numbers floating out there at the State House. None of them are too much divergent from the others. They're all in the same neighborhood in terms of what we're going to get for state aid. So we're going to use the 965 for our purposes for now. If it comes in greater than that, wonderful. Local receipts, we're expecting another increase of about $327,000. It'll get us to about $9 million from the $8.6 million that Mr. Gill is currently forecasting. We will need some free cash because our spend and our budgets, or proposed budget, is greater than what the revenue is going to be, so we'll have to make it up with free cash. We also expect the light department to give us $960,000 in lieu of taxes. That could be higher. Ought to be at least 2.5% per year going up, but it's only 1.5%. We have available funds, $780,000. So these are things like a perpetual care fund. We get wetland fees. We get ARPA money is in there to the tune of $200,000 from the schools. So we do have various funds that we're going to be bringing in to cover the cost. And total revenues is roughly $112 million.
I will note the available funds. So for opera money being used this year, it is $350,000 in all, including
in.
all the local budgets.
Yeah.
So that's something we'll mention later on as well, but yes.
So on expenses, this is the expenses broken down by department. General government coming at $3 million, public safety at 14.1, human resources at $1 million, public works at 7.8 million, and the schools at 49.7. And I'm going to turn it over to Doug to talk a little bit about the school budget.
Thank you, Dan. The priorities in this $49.7 million budget are really personnel. When we present our budget to school committee, we present it in 3 parts. Part 1 is personnel, part 2 is contractual services, and part 3 is materials and supplies. When we look at the comparison between fiscal year 23 and fiscal year 24, in terms of materials and supplies and contractual services, both of those areas are level funded this year, with the majority of our increases going to personnel. We're in the process right now of negotiating with the teachers union for a new contract, which expires in September 1. And we are looking forward to really trying to create a sustainable, healthy contract that will allow us to retain the staff that we have in place, and to also develop and keep them, right? Because right now, labor's ruling the roost. And if you are an experienced teacher, you can work in a number of places, and we're fortunate that the teachers that we have are choosing to work here. And so that is really the priority number 1. And parallel to that is the new high school, right? And so we feel like we've worked very hard over the last 5 or 6 years collaboratively with the town leadership to get the high school project where it is now. We're about 11 months away from putting a construction fence around the Sean F. Beasley Oval. And so that's going to come very, very quickly. And it's going to be a great opportunity for the schools to get a learning space that's similar to Galvin, and to also to kind of spread the activities that are happening in town. This evening at Galvin is the science fair, and we're just busting at the seams. We need more spaces, right? We currently have 2 preschool classrooms opening next fall at Woodville Elementary, and we're looking forward to the new high school spaces being able to definitely help with that. But that's a very quick summary.
Thank you. So, moving along the line, library at 1.9 million, vocational schools at 2.6, unclassified 2.1, and finally benefits, another big nut at 24.1 million. One of the things on on personal services, I talked about the salary increases and so forth, and all those folks that we hired have benefits, and you can see at 24.1 million, that is, I think I did personal services is roughly at 60 million. So benefits represent like 40% of what we pay in salaries. So benefits are very expensive. Other costs we have, capital, 2.24 million, debt service at 286. We have an article on our trash, 2.37 million. We have another article on police and fire indemnification, and we also have one on Medicaid, which is 0.09 million. Overlay account, 600,000. You know, that's been 600,000 for as long as I've been on the finance committee.
It's gonna stay there too.
So that's like 3 or 4 years, right, Dan?
A little more than that. A little more than that. No, but I mean, our assessor Victor does a great job, and the overlay account is used for people who come in and ask for tax abatement, and they never seem to spend the 600,000. In fact, as we're expect that, I guess we are going to receive 600,000 from their account back to the general fund this year, because we asked them for that money to help us with our free cash situation. So,
Dan.
yeah, that department does great work.
Dan, you commented on the length of time you've been doing this work. How long have you been doing this work?
I've been on the finance committee for over 20 years. I think about 20 years.
And as we said, I think this is our 15th or 16th
Yeah.
Town meeting pre-show together.
Yeah, it's always been 600,000 too. And then finally, the state and county sends us a bill because from like MBTA and other stuff that we have to pay back to the state. So the state giveth and the state taketh away. Wish they didn't take as much, but anyway. So that adds up to about $10.5 million.
See, that's a key thing, and I'm glad you brought that up, because when the state aid comes out or it's announced from the State House, you know, there's a big splash. State aid, you know, increased, 20%. And what you need to remember is that there's page 1, which shows everything that the town of Wakefield is going to receive, and then there's page 2 that are the charge-offs towards it. So you've got to look at both pages. You got to always turn to page 2. And for those viewers at home, we'll talk about it, calling it the cherry sheet coming out. The reason why is because years ago, when everything was snail mail, the cherry sheet actually came to each community on red paper. So they called it the cherry sheet. Now it's the electronic version that you got to punch in yourself to find out. So a little interesting history from us old timers, I guess.
Yeah.
And like you say, with the state aid increases, some of the things you read in newspapers and things like that, there's a lot of available funds, if you would, at the state level, and priorities. There's a lot of priorities at the state level, no different than there are at the town level. Right. But we continue to look for, and Steve does a great job working with the delegation, trying to make the case for more state aid. And Dan spoke about it early on, between the tax levy and the state aid. That's the area of opportunity on the state side. So.
I mean, this year we did get a good increase in Chapter 70, and I think I shared this. I know I shared it with the town council. I think I shared it with the finance committee. I was very happy when that first came out, particularly the Chapter 70 numbers. I did not even look at some of the other communities around us that had traditionally gotten a lot more per pupil than we have, because I think it's the only fair way of assessing it. And then after a couple of days, I said, let me look. And then I was all upset again. I should have gotten more, but that's okay. It was good. It was good.
So this slide's a little bit complicated because we have some unknowns. Our revenue, as I mentioned, we expect a total increase in revenue of about 5.7 million. But our increases in spending, I have salaries at 3.5 million as an estimate. And it's an estimate because we have a couple of contracts, fire and police contracts, that have not settled. We don't know what the final numbers will be. I have my own ballpark figure for what the increases will be in terms of personal services for fire and police. So I ballparked this at 3.5 million. We have a $400,000 increase in healthcare. Retirement. Healthcare is at 500,000. Medicare is at 87,000. And vocational schools at 89. And you watch the vocational schools, that's going to go up even faster and further. Capital, additional $140,000 there. And if I look at,
If we can jump back to healthcare.
yeah, sure.
It is, 500,000 is a lot of money. I agree. But I think we were pretty pleased actually with that increase based on national averages being around 5.7%. We're in the state GIC program. I think our increase was in the 2%, 2.5, 2.7% range. So this, although it's 500,000, you say that's a lot of money. It is. We were actually pretty happy with that
Yeah,
when it came
yeah.
out.
Yeah, I think, and the other thing about the 500,000, not only it's a low increase in terms of the rates, the healthcare rates, but also, so that would increase it, maybe 300,000 or 400,000, but then the additional 100,000 or so is because of additional people.
Right.
We have more people, so that's gonna, and it's also, there's a contingency in there for the
New hires.
The new hires, we expect younger people and probably family coverage.
Yep.
And with family coverage is more expensive than single. So that's why we end up with the 500,000 for that item. And then on the department budget increases, this one again, complicated again because of unknowns. The total I've got is 3.6 million. The schools are at 5.2, but we got offsets, ARPA money, and some revolving account money that'll come back. So it comes in at 4.2 on tax levy. Police and fire, I'm estimating at 4.7. When you see the budget presented at town meeting Monday night, and you look at the math, you'll say, Dan's crazy, it's not 4.7, it's 2.4, 2.3,
Right.
something like that. And that would be accurate, that's what we're gonna vote on. But until these contracts are negotiated and settled, I'm trying to come up with my best guess. And I'm using 4.7 for police and fire based on those guesses. DPW comes in at 3.1, no guessing there. And the library is at 3.0, no guessing there. Capital. Joe, would you like to talk about the capital?
Absolutely. So the capital process for the year is actually really a smaller process within, the whole townwide process of budgeting for the year. So every year, right around Thanksgiving, this is run by a committee of public volunteers. My role with this is essentially I'm their liaison, or as they like to call me, their scribe sometimes. But they will get requests from all the different departments in town, and basically what they're looking for is the assets or additional tools and investment they need to either maintain or level up the amount of service that we can provide, or make sure that everything's in a state of good repair. This year, the committee received an initial request from all the different departments in town, 6.7 million from the tax levy, and then in public works, the two enterprise funds at 667,000 and 842,000. The committee holds a series of meetings. They go through a whole bunch of different things. And they basically create a rank and file and some priority, try to triage the list down to their goal, which is generally around $2 million. With the advent of ARPA and a lot of different funds out there on the state level and some success we've had with grants, this year has actually proved to be a little bit different. We've seen big investment in some of our utilities on buildings, particularly in some HVAC related to the Woodville School. So we're appropriately getting to things that are coming to age. You also see the Soldiers and Sailors Monument is included in this. That's something that can has been kicked around for quite some time. I think it really picked up a little bit more steam around the time of the World War II Memorial. And to be honest with you, I think since it was donated in 1902, aside from putting a fence around that, we really haven't invested anything into it. So we got our money's worth out of that. They were able to prioritize that. So the group invites all the department heads and the representatives in. They whittle the list down And this year, they are bringing to town meeting for a vote on the tax side for about $2.4 million of requests. Water is 667, and then sewer is 477. If this gets voted, we get to work, we get replacing some things, and then in the summer, typically right after that week that we talked about after the 4th of July where we take a break, they're asking for an update and we're back to it again. So the committee does a lot of great work. Like I said, it's all volunteer, so it's a really interesting, great process to be a part of.
Yeah, I might also point out that, back at the beginning, a few slides back, I talked about priorities. And you can see that here where we've got facilities, $730,000, and those are our buildings. And public safety, we got a fleet of, included in the fleet is police vehicles, I believe 3.
Yes.
Police vehicles are in that. So fields and parks, the cemetery is part of this. So this really does, speak to the priorities that I talked about a few slides back. So for fiscal year 23, the one we're in now, our budget expenditures is about 108 million. Proposed for fiscal year 24 is almost 113 million. Total increase about $4.6 million or 4.3%. Our revenue we projected at 112, and that leaves a difference of about $774,000 to be covered by free cash. For those on the finance committee who are watching or listening, and you may recall I had numbers of more closer to $1.8 million, $2 million, and I said we need to find some money, and somebody's writing us some checks, and we got it down to 774. I'm not sure who the anonymous donor was, but I appreciate it. No, a lot of hard work went into trying to figure out what we could do to try to close this budget gap. So challenges. Building, field maintenance, so forth. Energy improvement still at the top. We've been working on that for years, 7 years we've been working on that. We still have a ways to go. We still got a number of buildings that are not energy efficient, and we're trying to make some headway in that.
And if I can just touch on that for 1 second too. So
Yeah.
with the advent of becoming a green community this year, so we're going to actually be able to leverage that in the future to our benefit. So right now, there's a lot of money that came with the designation, and you get designation grant funds. We've actually applied for some holistic energy upgrades to some buildings to be able to defer that. But that's one of those things that every time we can leverage that, any money from the State House or any grants that we see coming up, we're going after it, because if there's a smaller initial investment, the payback comes even faster, and something that we definitely want to get accomplished.
So do you have a list now of particular buildings you'd like to improve on?
So generally what we do, with the exception of the schools, my group is responsible for the energy usage and consumption in all the town buildings. So what we've done is I track it every year, and I inherited a lot of longitudinal data from my predecessor, probably about 2 decades of kilowatt consumption, gas consumption, things like that. So basically what we've done is we found out which buildings that we've had. Public safety is a big energy consumer. It's going through its energy project now with the addition. The Civic Center and Town Hall, and we're attacking them that way. So any of our biggest consumers where the occupancy is dynamic and open quite often, we're going after those buildings to try to take those higher, the money aside from it, the higher, unit consumption, and lower that right off the bat.
Excellent. Maintenance of roads, we talked about roads and sidewalks and so forth. We did do a road bond in 2020, and I must say that I went down Salem Street yesterday on my motorcycle, and I got rattled around pretty good. So I'm looking forward to when Salem Street gets done.
We talked about that today.
It is on the docket sooner than later. So the road bond clicked in. We actually started talking to it. It picked up a lot of steam pre-COVID.
Yeah.
We passed it at the town meeting in the middle of COVID. The first year out of the gate was a little bit tough because of people's schedules, crews were sick, things like that. But last year we had a great season. We rehabbed over 3 miles of road and 3 miles of sidewalk, which was unheard of. And then this year we get about another 5 miles in the queue ready to go. So
5 miles this year?
Yep.
Well, that's outstanding.
Why don't you name some of the roads that we're going to be looking at this year?
So just a couple, I'll just rattle through my list. Quarter Street, So essentially, a lot of what we did was the planning and prioritization of this. We wanted to make sure we're following the gas and light department, some of our own utility work at Public Works. So we wanted to make sure all the underground stuff was done.
Sure.
The Vernon Street area, actually, the Dahlberg School is really kind of like the epicenter of that. That was where all that was, most done underneath. So we did a lot of work up there off of Pleasant Street. And we're continuing to work our way towards the downtown and then towards Greenwood as the years go on. But still coming up this year, we have Quarter Street, Wave Avenue. Quartus is going to go from Pleasant to Vernon. Wave Ave is from Pleasant to Vernon. Lowell Street from Salem Street to Dexter's Lane. Montrose Ave, Pearl Park, Bryant Street, Byron, section of Albion Street.
And let me jump in. Salem from Montrose to,
Salem from Nablus Way to Sullivan Park.
Right.
But the water main is finished from essentially Sullivan Field, so the BMX track heading towards Linfield, all the way to Montrose Ave, and then Montrose Ave to Sophia. We have Daniel Road. Broadway is going to get new sidewalks, new curb, all new asphalt and that. The section in front of Mike's Gym, we are waiting for the developer right now to finalize some plans. There's some utility cuts that might happen out there, so we're working on some other things, potential realigning the intersection and things like that. We're continuing on, so Vernon Street from Salem to Lowell, Jennifer Road, Fairlane Road, Longboat Road, and then Lowell Street from Dexter's Lane to Vernon Street. And that area right around Slice too will also involve incorporating a grant that we got to tee up that intersection and make it a little bit safer for some traffic there and slow some people down, as they navigate through that. So all combined, 5.02 miles. Probably you'll see a little over 3, maybe 3.5 get constructed, and then the rest of it will be finished up in the spring.
Glad to hear Montrose is on that list. I use Montrose a lot, and that is a teeth rattler.
So that one is so they're out there doing the cuts for the drainage, and they're doing some test pits to make sure they can fit the drainage in where they need to. And they tell us that they will be starting to lay pavement sometime in June.
Oh, excellent.
And there's a large area that is tied to the utility line
Right.
being finished, right? So
Yeah.
there's a lot of streets maybe not mentioned that are still need underground utility work, but the electric utility is obligated to be paving those streets, correct, Joe?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that'll be coordinated with our sidewalk work, our curb work. So
Right.
the same holistic approach to everything is going to be able to happen. What we don't want to have happen is just kind of like a patch and pray anymore. We want to make sure that we're maintaining and
That's
doing
a
the
good way of putting
holistic
it.
right way to go. So.
Stormwater, we're still working on that. We got quite a bit of work to do there, and I understand the Veterans Field parking lots in that list in other areas. As I mentioned before, we got $78 million of capital projects that Joe has identified that need some work. If we had the funds, we could do it all, but we don't. Other challenges, we're using some short-term revenue like ARPA to run operating costs. The Finance Committee has taken a position that we prefer that not happen, because what do you do when the money runs out and the person is still at the desk, and that becomes a problem. And the other last bullet was one I added because I went back and looked at our trend and what we've been doing. And over the past 10 years, our average costs have been going up 4.35% per year, while our revenue has risen at 4%. And that is a recipe for a mess. One of the things that I've talked about over the years is trying to stick to a 4% increase at maximum on what we spend. And the reason for that is I don't want to outstrip our revenue. Deficit funding is not a great way to go. Opportunities. So the Eversource power line coming in, maybe it's 700,000 a bump, maybe $1 million. We don't know. We're hopeful it's higher.
I mean, it's going to happen one year. It's going to happen eventually.
Right. At
It's
some
just every
point.
year that you miss it, that it gets delayed.
Right.
And a lot of it was COVID, a lot of it was issues in construction, a lot of it was supply chain issues.
For the sharp-eyed folks out there, you'll
Yeah.
notice I had an increased tax revenue of, I could have put a question mark there, I guess, but we really don't know.
Right. And what happens is there's a multiplier effect, right? So
Right.
We forecast it's gonna come in fiscal year 2022. Let's use $1 million as an example, and it doesn't. So not only did we not get that $1 million in '22, we did not get the $1 million in '23. We do not get it in, $1.2 million over that in '23 and '24, so it multiplies, so.
Right, right. Every year it's a delay, it does hurt us. We're hopeful for more state aid, we've already talked about that. We've already talked about grants, always, everybody's looking for grants. I mean, superintendent talked about going for grants and getting some, and Joe's doing the same. So we gotta keep that up.
And,
New
and
growth.
what we've been doing, like with the Green Communities Act, becoming a housing choice community, things like that, that gives us a leg up in getting the grants. You know, we're really in the queue further along. The other thing that helps us with grants is that we are pretty shovel ready. We've got a great DPW department that can turn around a project very quickly where other communities can't. And sometimes you find out that, hey, you know, you're in the queue for a grant. It's got to be spent by the end of this fiscal year. Can you do it? Yes, we can. So those are things that really help us out as we're going on there.
Sure. New growth, we've had a nice uptick in the last couple of years. We continue to expect that to go up. I'm running at about a 4% increase, but as anybody who wanders around town knows, there's a lot of construction going on.
Right.
There's a lot of new projects coming online. So we may get a nice bailout there in terms of new growth.
And when you think about the head of the lake, 200 Corner Powered Ave, a shovel hasn't even hit the ground yet. I mean, that's an improved project. That's going to be a lot of new growth right there, so.
How many kids are gonna move in?
I will tell you, the superintendent and I talked about this the other day, and it is not all that significant in these new developments.
Okay,
But,
great.
and also, I will add, in that particular project, I think we've built in some contingencies
Right.
to support the budget differently, right, in the event that we do get an influx. But we did look at all of the development and the number of students that have, how it's impacted the schools, and I think we're managing well.
Right.
And so with that growth and new folks moving in, local receipts will have an impact, you know, buying cars and excise tax and so forth. So that's on a plus side for local receipts, but on the minus side, you keep talking about this recession that's coming. And if recession does come, obviously things like hotels and meals tax revenue will take a dip. Motor vehicle will take a dip. So that one, you know, it could go either way. Really, tea leaves are not very helpful right now in terms of what's going to happen with local receipts. We just have to wait and see. So unlike years past where I've had a single forecast for where we think things are looking at going forward, this year I decided that we really need to present sort of a range for everybody to consider. So my first range has to do with a forecast for the pessimist. For those of you out there who are thinking that the world is coming to an end, well, it's not. But we're expecting, for the pessimists out there, free cash will increase $500,000 from the town, $600,000 from the overlay account, which is a one-time free cash, hoping that the school department can turn over some free cash at the end of the year, roughly $400,000. And based on the forecast of the way reading the tea leaves and so forth, for the pessimists out there, we run out of money in fiscal year '27. Not a great spot to be in. So serious cuts will have to be made. So this is the forecast for the pessimists. And I'd focus on the last two columns where we show the increase in costs and the increases in income. And you'll see that the costs are running at about 4% per year going out after 2027, or starting in 2027. I baked into 24, 25, and 26 some cost increases that we expect because of the temporary nature of ARPA and other sources. And we have new contracts coming in for police, fire, and the schools, teachers A and other. Teachers A, I guess, is the big nut. Our income, I'm expecting that to increase just a little bit less than 4%. And so what happens, you see the surplus is actually a deficit. There's my 774 for fiscal year '24, and then it turns into 2.2 million, and you can see how large it gets, and we run out of funds, so serious cuts will have to be made. And then on the flip side, I said, well, for the optimists out there, free cash will come in $1 million from the town, 600,000 from overlay. The superintendent, his finance group will come up with 800,000 to turn back over to us in terms at the end of the year. We'll cut the OPEB trust contributions to 1 million from 1.4 million that we have now. What that will do is still get us on a fully funded basis, but it's just going to take years longer. It's going to add 4, 5, 6 years to the point that we fully fund our post-retirement medical costs. And then I also increased new growth in state aid inflation at roughly 4% per year rather than the current 3% that I've been using for quite a long time.
And I call this somewhat optimist, for the somewhat optimist. We had that discussion today.
Yeah, we
you
did.
and I.
We did. So, the real answer is probably somewhere
Somewhere,
in
yeah.
between. Hard to say. And so under that scenario, you can see again, focusing on the last two columns, that our increase in income is more like a 4.25, which is greater than the last 10-year average at 4. So we're saying things are going to get better than they have been. And once again, increase in cost is running at around 4%. And what that does is start eliminating the deficit, making it smaller and smaller year by year. And our free cash will run, I went back and double-checked the numbers, it's still going to run around, $4 to $6 to $7 million per year for the next 5 or 6 years. And our reserve is going to be around 5.5 to 6.5% of total budget, rather than the total, or a goal of roughly 10%. So you got to be super optimistic for us to get our reserves and our free cash back up to where we have been most recently. So, and I'm only going to speak for myself on this, we need to tighten down our spending for the coming years, or convince our state legislators to give us more money than they have been. I mean, that's really where it boils down to. And it's probably going to be a combination of both.
I would agree. Yep.
Yeah, we're going to have to cut back, and we're going to have to get more. So those are the numbers for the optimist.
I do think that at the end of this fiscal year, our free cash balances will be north of 7 million. I think that over the years, Dan, we have had a lot of bets about having a steak dinner.
Mhm.
We have never done it, so
Which
we
we
have to
haven't
do
done it.
we have to do it this year. Maybe we
Sooner or
both owe
later.
each other.
Sooner or later, has to be done.
But I think it's the cautionary tone is true. We do need to be ever vigilant in the budgets. I think as we have been since sometimes forced upon us, but I think we have done some great service upgrades to the community, and we need to maintain those services and find a way to deliver them cheaper. So that's our challenge.
That is our challenge. So that is my last slide. So unless anybody else has anything on this stuff, I'm going to turn it back over to Jim for closing comments.
Great. I don't know. Does anybody else on the panel have any other final comments?
I think we need to thank Dan publicly, and we do it. Maybe you were going to do that at the
Yeah,
end.
there was something.
Okay,
you said
go
to
ahead.
that. So, the folks that are on the Finance Committee, and, I believe this year, like we have in previous years, we've fulfilled the obligation by reviewing the detailed expenditures of all the budgets, on behalf of the legislative body, which is the folks that show up at town meeting and all of the people that are voters. But when it comes to the Finance Committee, Dan's been on it for over 20 years, as he describes, and Joe mentioned his predecessor having all of this linear data and stuff like that. Well, we want to talk data. If you like data, you need to sit down with Dan, like we do on the Finance Committee, with the forecasting tools that are used. So Dan puts an amazing amount of effort in, and without him, what our job on the Finance Committee would be a lot harder. So on behalf of them and myself, I truly appreciate all the effort that you put in every year.
Thank
So
you.
Thank you. And again, I believe the committee this year fulfilled the obligation. We took the time. We had plenty of meetings and a lot of dialogue, some of it colorful usually at the Finance Committee meeting. And it's a good group of volunteers, and we work for the benefit of and on behalf of those folks that are part of the overall community. So, and the budget this year has been described and been laid out, you know, is in line, and we're comfortable with the numbers that we can fund the budget using everything that's been described tonight. So, and with that, I think that concludes the program for this evening.
Thank you.
I'll see you
you.
Monday.
Monday
See
night,
you all
7
Monday.
o'clock at the Gal.
Don't forget, 7 o'clock Monday.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jack.